I think, for most people that I work with, they get to a point in their career where they get to this fork in the road where they just kind of say, I've kind of done what I needed to do in the corporate world.
All right, well, welcome everybody to our next fireside chat. I'm joined here by Eric Little. Eric is an independent consultant with Franchoice, and I'm going to kind of hand it off to him here in a second to give everybody some understanding of what Franchoice is, and the value that he brings to the table as an independent consultant. So, Eric, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, Jeff.
Absolutely. So why don't you take a couple of minutes and just share with everyone your experience in the franchising industry?
Yeah, so I've been in franchising pretty much since college. In the beginning, I worked for a big company called Ashland Oil, and got into franchise sales in their Valvoline division back in the late '90s. And then, from there, just every few years, I would end up at a different company and rose through the ranks, and then eventually ended up as a C-level exec for a healthcare company based here in Nebraska. So about 20 years working on the inside of franchise companies, which I think ultimately gives my folks that I work with, it gives them perspective that they wouldn't have otherwise gotten, I think, based on that experience.
Nice. So how many franchises have you been involved with over the course of your career, would you estimate?
Oh, that I work for directly?
Or transactions have you done?
Oh, I don't even, the transactions, I'm not sure I could even count them, but I work directly probably for five, I'm guessing, if without looking at the list, but probably five franchisors as a W-2 employee. And then, outside of that, anytime you hang around an industry as long as I have, I've been around it close to 25 years now, you just sort of get to know everybody in it, and you get to know the people and the leadership teams and the brands, and it's you lose track of how many people there are until you were to sit down and go through your LinkedIn profile or something.
All right, so tell me why would somebody work with Eric when looking into buying a franchise? What's the reason that they bring you in on the conversation?
Noticed here lately, the barometer of success, I think, has evolved. It used to be, what's your title and how much money do you make? And do you have a reserved parking spot? Do you have equity in the company? And do you have an office overlooking the park? And people, and I was part of that, right? I was part of the corporate world, so to speak, where those things are tangible. My first corporate job ever, and this was a joking situation. It was done in good fun, but one of my coworkers came up to me, first week in the office. He said, "How many squares are you?" And I said, what do you mean? How many squares am I? He's like, well, my office has six tiles in the ceiling. How many squares do you have? And I just remember thinking, like, is this what it's going to be like? Is this the barometer of success? So anyway, I do think for a lot of people that went through the corporate world, sort of experience, that's the path they were on for a long time. But the people that I talk to get to a point where those things just aren't as important anymore. The new barometer for success, in my opinion, is freedom, the flexibility and freedom in their career. And so that's usually when people come to me. They come to me looking for more freedom, flexibility, fulfillment, and financial independence. And what they get in working with me is what I talked about just a minute ago, which is, I'm a career franchising exec, right? So I've spent my entire career working on the inside of franchise companies. So that perspective is huge that I can pass on to the folks that I work with, and I think they really appreciate that.
Neat. And what are you seeing that's trending these days in the franchise world? Are there any major changes in the way that franchises are getting structured and organized, and the support systems, things of that nature?
Yeah, I've seen an evolution over the last 5 or 10 years in a couple of ways. One is the ownership structures. I think it used to be that franchise companies, they wanted an owner operator in the business. They wanted somebody who was going to be very active, and they're going to work a lot of hours. And those still exist, by the way, but there's been an evolution by the leadership teams of the franchise companies to target folks who really understand how to scale a business. And it's really hard to scale a business if you're the guy driving around in the van providing whatever it is, the service that your business offers, right? If you're the technician in the business, to use the E-Myth book reference, if you're the technician in the business, you're not using your best efforts to scale it. You're just the cog in the wheel, right? So I think one of the things I've seen evolve over the last few years is now franchisors are targeting higher level people that understand P&L management, understand how money flows through a business, and therefore understand how to scale it more so than they're looking for the, I call it the man in the van kind of franchisee. So I think that's one area that I've seen. Another one's been in technology. So, and this one really is even in the last 5 years. There's so many good businesses out there and so many good industries, but there's a lot of fragmentation. There's a lot of fragmented industries out there that have been good businesses all along, and they've been good business for decades, but they've never really had to evolve. They've never really had to use technology and business intelligence tools and data. They've really never evolved in that way. So what I've seen in the last few years is there's some very, very smart leadership teams at these franchise companies that have deployed these BI tools to give them information that their franchisees can use to take action in their business. And so they're learning much faster than they used to learn when they didn't have access to all that data. So those are two of the things I've seen.
That's great insight and very interesting, because my background, I've worked with franchise groups and companies of all sizes across the country, and they've always had corporate. That's how it gets referred to. The franchisee says, well, corporate, they don't let us do. They control all of these things. Are you seeing a general transparency start to emerge between the corporate world and the franchisees, and they're trying to be more collaborative?
I think the transparency has been there for a while. I think it's the technology that's evolved to allow for that transparency. And I do think the cultural shift has happened too. I've worked for companies in the past who, their culture was that they were pretty private. And so they didn't share as much of that information. I remember one of the companies I worked for, we published the top 50 report, every month or every week or whatever it was, but we didn't put names on it. We just put the number one did this much last week, number two did this much last week. And what we found was happening was that those people, they kind of knew who each other were. And so they'd call each other, hey, I'm number 4 this month. Which one's you? And so they were trying to figure it out anyway, because everybody wants to know where they stack up. And so I do think there's been a bit more, the transparency between the corporate office and the franchisees, I think, has been there all along, but it's been that there's been this hesitancy on the part of the corporate office to be like, ooh, how much of that really is private versus how much, should we share in the interest of best practices? So I think there has been an evolution in that area.
That's great. Okay, interesting. Next question I have here is, can you share with us some of the common mistakes that you encounter or that you see throughout the franchising process? So if someone's thinking about this and trying to wrap their mind around transitioning into becoming a business owner, what are some of the pitfalls that you'll help them avoid?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is making emotional decisions, right? So what normally happens, there's over 4,000 different franchise concepts out there. So what happens a lot of times is people, they hit their keyboard and they find a search engine, they type in franchise opportunities, and the next thing you know, they're clicking and scrolling and filling out inquiry forms for brands. And they do things like, boy, I just drove by Crumble Cookie the other day, and there's a line out the door. That looks like a good business. Maybe I'll inquire about that one. And not that Crumble is a good or a bad opportunity, but I think people are making emotional decisions sometimes when they try to do those initial searches. And before they know it, they're too far down the road of looking at a specific opportunity without having first considered, what kind of business would I actually be a good fit for, right? What characteristics am I looking for in a business? And so that's really the big value that I provide, is before we start talking about brands, before we start talking about industries, we start talking about the people that I'm working with and what they like to do and what their preferences are. And once I get a feel for what those primary characteristics are going to be for a business for them, then I can go find businesses that match only those characteristics. So it's way more efficient. It's way less emotional, and it saves them so much time because, I'm verifying that the territory is available in their area. I'm verifying that the investment parameters are in the ballpark for what they're looking for. I'm verifying that the number of employees and types of employees that they want to work with are in there. So, and those are just a few examples of, dozens or maybe over 100 different criteria that we look at to come up with, what are the ideal characteristics for you?
I love that. One of the things that I'm picking up here is the time involved in going down a path with a particular brand and realizing it's not the right fit at the end, and then having to start all over. You can help avoid all of that waste, all of that mismanagement of time by just asking the right questions up front, doing the research, and then bringing the right companies back.
Well, you bring this up. I literally just in the last couple of weeks started working with somebody that was all the way at the end of the process with one brand. And it happened to be a brand that I like. I was very familiar with. I said, you picked out a good one there. Good for you. You know, you got lucky, right? There's 4,000 out there, different brands, and you stumbled on one that I think is pretty good. And she said, yeah, but I haven't looked at anything else. And so it's sort of that, like, she could go forward with that brand and maybe it works out okay, but would she always be wondering, what else is out there? Did I do enough research before I jumped onto this boat, so to speak? And so now that's what we're doing. We're taking her through some other brands, and we uncovered a characteristic that was not involved in the brand that she is down the road with. And so I don't know where it's going to go. She may end up back with that initial brand, but even if she goes back with the initial one, she will at least have had the experience of taking a look at some other opportunities. And now she's got an even better chance for success because she's not going to be looking over her shoulder going, maybe I left something better on the table.
Yeah, it won't be keeping her awake at night going, what if?
Yeah, because it's going to be hard. I mean, that's the part that doesn't get talked about as often, right? In these kind of things, it's like owning a business is difficult. And, when you run into those difficult days, you have to have a compelling reason to push you through. You have to have a compelling reason for being in that business. And if you made an emotional decision and it was a mistake, it's going to be really hard to push through very many of those tough days in the startup phase.
Right. Okay. So you bring up an important part of the process is the emotional part of the process, right? They're emotionally committed to a particular brand, perhaps, or they're emotionally committed to the idea of owning a business or quitting their job. They're over it. They're just burnt out and they're ready for something new. How do you manage those emotions, especially when, let's just say, for example, it's a husband and wife team?
Well, yeah, that second part of that question is really interesting. So I'll deal with the first part first. I tell people all the time, being frustrated with your current situation, that can be the catalyst. And it is for many, many people. It's the catalyst. They're unhappy in their current situation because it's not going to put them on the path that's going to lead them to where they ultimately want to go with their lifestyle. So what I tell people is you can be upset with your job and have that be the catalyst that started you on this path. That can't be the reason that you end up on it, though. It can just be the catalyst to get you started. The reason for you to be on the path is at the very end of it, right? What's the lifestyle that you're trying to create? What are you trying to create for yourself and your family? What's that lifestyle look like? And then what's the business that's going to get you to that lifestyle? And maybe it's not a business at all, who knows? But that's part of the process that you get in working with somebody like me is we'll help you. That banter back and forth helps you figure out, how important is it for me to own a business? I mean, I just talked to somebody earlier today. I said, you've got what sounds like a really good job and good income. And, why are we talking here? And we figured out that for her, there wasn't a lot in her job that allowed her to feel that she's making a difference in the world. So she's looking for a business that will help her make a difference. Right. But those are the kinds of conversations that come out in this process that help people zero in on their compelling reason, and it helps them, push through those tough days. Now, the husband-wife teams. So if anybody's watching this video that I've worked with, it's a husband-wife team, they've heard me say these words. I am not a marriage counselor. Right. So every household runs differently. And so one of the things I've learned in 20 some years of doing this is don't assume that both spouses need to be involved. And just because one spouse tells you that they make all the decisions in their family doesn't mean that he or she does. In fact, it usually means they don't if they come out and say that. And so I think that you have to ask the right questions. It comes back to that. And so for some people I think about that I put into business, I've rarely, if ever, talked to their spouse. And there's others where we do every call together. And so it really is, it's just important to understand what your spouse needs. I'll say this though, ultimately, anybody who doesn't include their spouse in the process better be keeping them up to speed along the way, because it's just not reasonable for any person to receive months of research that you did in one conversation and expect them to be like, okay, that sounds great, right? Like you can't go through a 3-month process of researching franchises, get all excited about it, and have the benefit of all the knowledge of the research you've done, and then expect to be able to effectively communicate to your partner in some short amount of time. It's just not possible. So if that person is in a veto type of position, it's going to be tough for you to get into that business. And so that's why I say all along the way, whether the spouse is involved in the process or not, make sure you're talking about it.
All right, that's great advice. Well, sir, this has been a pleasure chatting with you. Are there any last words of advice that you would share with any potential franchisee?
I think I would just say this. I have run across so many people over the years that, the fear in them is so strong that it's so much easier for them to stay in their current job or stay in their current position, right? The status quo is by far the biggest competitor to any franchise brand out there. It's easier emotionally for people to just keep on doing what they're doing, even if they're not totally happy, and not take the risk and not reap the rewards of that. But if you look at all the smart people in the world and how they look back, especially the elderly, they often regret the things they didn't do. They regret the swings they didn't take. And so I would just say, if you're somebody that's been thinking about owning your own business, there are ways to manage that fear. The only way really to manage fear is with additional information. So you can sit on the sidelines and wish you had your own business, or you could actually take the first step and talk to somebody like me and actually start to gather information to see if you are going to be able to overcome your fear. But you're certainly not going to get over it by standing on the sidelines.
Great advice. I love it. So, Eric, appreciate your time here. If anybody wants to work with you directly, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Thank you. Yeah, my direct phone number is area code 801-647-4837. That's you can call or text that anytime you like. And then my email address is elittle at franchoice.com.
Excellent. I'll put that information in the description below this video. So thank you, Eric. I appreciate you, and I look forward to another opportunity to chat with you in the future.
Well, I appreciate you as well, Jeff. Have a good day.